What you're describing, this doesn't pencil out, was the phrase you ended on, right? I have my own version of this, right? I call it, it needs a better term, but it's the theory of close calls, that basically you can deduce where you are with respect to hazards by figuring out how many close calls you've encountered, right? They describe a curve, and part of that curve is unsurvivable. And so, if if you've had three near misses for a serious traffic accident in the last year, probably there's something wrong with your driving. It's not guaranteed, but you can tell. And so when I look at just the list of serious disasters that we've faced in the last decade, for example, or if we go back a little bit further, we've had the financial collapse of 2008, we've had the triple meltdown at Fukushima, we've had the Aliso Canyon leak of natural gas, we've had the Deepwater Horizon leak in the Gulf, etc. In other words, we've got this list of close calls, all of which were survivable, but they tell us something about the magnitude of hazards that we're playing with. And we can infer the rest of the curve. We can infer from Fukushima that a much worse accident could have happened, orders of magnitude worse. Why didn't it? We got lucky. None of the fuel pools cracked, right, during these explosions, but they could have. It wasn't like being clever prevented it from happening. We just got lucky, right? So you don't want to be dependent on luck for your survival, right? You never want that to happen to the extent you can avoid it. And we're there.
Yeah, we're so there. And I think I just read an article in the last few weeks that was just basically talking about that. Like, we actually may have been sailing way closer to the wind than we ever imagined, because we've just got perpetual accumulated survivor bias. Like, right, we've like, the largest meteor crater we've ever mapped is like a mile across, because if there'd been one that's 3 miles across, we wouldn't be here to map it. And like all of those kind of things. It's like everybody in the NBA, playing basketball must make you tall. It's the correlation causation things. But the idea that, like, how many tight spots have we just ducked to even be here in the first place? And is that a sign of our brilliance or success, or is it just utterly random statistics
that
have delivered us to this point?
And it's a little bit of a combination, right? Like, we do get clever, but too late, and we far too often end up persisting out of luck. I will say that the upshot of the theory of close calls, when one deploys it personally, is that when you detect that something you're doing is resulting in luck being the reason that you made it through, you should treat each instance as if it had gone the other way, right? If you step off the curb and you are not struck by a car, the inference you should take is not, well, I must be doing something right because I wasn't hit. The inference is, actually, I did everything necessary to be hit by a car, and the fact that I wasn't hit by a car is immaterial. That was the luck part. So I should alter my behavior radically rather than very little as a consequence of this observation. But if I can head back to the question of what drives you, and actually, I did want to contrast it. What I suspect is distinct is that you are driven by the emotional horror of allowing what is happening to humanity to unfold without doing everything in your power to prevent it. And I must say, I think everybody in this sort of Game B space has to have some mechanism for dealing with the recognition of where we're headed, because it really is so appalling, really, the needlessness of it, right? As you point out, the vulnerability of the infinite game and the likelihood that fools will be allowed to drive us into the reinvention of a finite human game is so tragic. In my case, I think I proceed from the recognition. In fact, I say sometimes that I know of no reason that we are too late to save ourselves. I believe saving ourselves is still possible,
Mhm.
but I'll bet against us. All right, I'll do everything in my power to make sure we don't screw this up. But if I had to guess what happens next, we miss the opportunity, right? Now, why do I say that, right? For one thing, that tends to demotivate a certain number of people, right? On the other hand, there is something necessary in order to play around in this space of solution making. One has to, or maybe one doesn't have to. Maybe the point I'm getting at is that uh, I find one of the things that's most fascinating about you is how close to that emotional motivation you are, right? I have to find distance from it in order to think about these things, um, and it's a natural way for me to approach it. And I see you as almost doing the opposite trick, which is staring directly into the abyss and kind of keeping an eye on it in order to keep you going. Am
Hmm.
I off in left field here?
Well, I mean, I'm only like whatever. I'm a mutant that doesn't have perspective on what is, um, totally boring or unique about my own lived experience. I just worked under the naive assumption that everybody kind of thought things and saw things the way I did. But my life was always split between academic study, like fascinated about the deep cuts and the research, but then also direct experience and of the most raw, alive living I could possibly do. And you and Heather have done amazing stuff down in the rainforest. Like experiential learning was a thing I was always passionate about. So like mountaineering, guiding, and so by both professional training, but also by disposition, I probably sought this out. I feel like I'm always scouting ahead of the group to figure out what's next, what's around the bend, where's the next crux, like the hard thing we have to prepare for, where's the next resource, water, campsite, whatever it would be, and shuttle running into the future to try and map and spot that so that the rest of the party, the rest of the group has a chance of making it to that place. And I mean, I even end the book like on the one hand, this was completely, and it still might just blow up and destroy my career writing this book. It's the most ridiculous, grab every single like tap dance through the minefield, God, sex, death, and rapture ideologies in a world that's lost its mind. Let's bundle them all together, talk about them all, and hope it goes well. Right?
You forgot about the psychedelics.
Yeah. Like, yes, drugs, sex, God, death, and the end of the world. What could possibly go
Right.
wrong? And and there goes my my corporate speaking career, if I ever had one, right? So, but on the other hand, I felt like I could not. And the inspiration I took was something along the lines of like the Svalbard seed bank, up in Scandinavia, of like, hey, what are all these heirloom seeds? Can we put them in a vault because we might need them later? Or even like the Irish monasteries that they had the palimpsests, like the reskin parchments where they would write and then overwrite because it was so precious for their illumined manuscripts, and then they ended up randomly being this hidden treasure trove of some of the ancient Greek writings that then got rediscovered and kind of kicked off the Italian Renaissance and that whole Neoplatonic revival, which kind of gave us the seeds of the Enlightenment in us today. So in the writing of the book and the attempting to make it an open source toolkit, I was like, I have no idea how this is going to land. It could go over like a ton of bricks in 2021. But is this potentially a little manual where somebody someplace could use to reboot vibrant, thriving, healthy, pro-social culture? And that's kind of what I had. That was my commitment. It was sort of Bhagavad Gita, like you're not going to get what you want, but you got to do it anyway. So
Right.
stack up and make art.
Yeah. Well, all right. That's interesting. In my darker moments, I have wondered if, I'm not a believer in fate or anything like it, but if my obligation isn't to try to document what happened here, um, because it would be too hard to stop it. Now, it's a thought I keep control of, and I shunted away to keep myself going on the
So
task.
so wait. So say that again. I want to get
Well,
that.
to me, it looks like this. I don't. I know that or I think I know that we could save ourselves, and actually, what we produce now could be. We could deliver on the promise of the civilization that hasn't quite worked, that we are presently participants in. But I don't expect us to do it because, as you point out, I see us getting dumber rather than smarter, which, that could be the adaptive valley. It could be the darkness before the dawn, but there's a really good chance it's not, which means that, well, either what happened here will be invisible to everyone else in the universe permanently, right? Maybe we just join the silent majority of the Fermi paradox, or somebody happens by and they look at the ruins of planet Earth and they say, what happened here? And I don't think there's a good description for them to find. And that's sad, because the lesson of it might be for them to be able to save their civilization, right? A spacefaring creature would have a lot to lose. Maybe they wouldn't be spacefaring at this level if they hadn't figured it out already. So maybe there's nothing for them to learn from us. But I do wonder if the obligation isn't, in some sense, to just create something that says, all right, let's describe in game theoretic terms what happened here and why something that didn't have to end came crashing down, right? And then where do you leave it, right? What do you write it in? Do you write it in Bakelite? That's a very durable substance. Where do you leave it? But anyway, this is my dark side, and I keep it at bay by basically imagining that we're one headed for a waterfall, and we're one to have a very low chance of being able to paddle fast enough to get out of the pull of the waterfall. There's still no point at which your chance is so low that it makes sense to stop paddling, right? So, basically my sense is, let's paddle like hell. Let's see if we can do something surprising here. And that is not an emotional thought for me, right? It's just like, well, logically speaking, what else are you going to do, right? Let's see if we can turn this around. So, that's how I get there. And what I'm trying to tease apart here is that I have the sense that this looks very different from inside your skull. And yes, I recognize the problem of it being very hard to regard oneself because our experience is so dominated by our own consciousness, and it's very hard to step outside it. But what is it like for you to confront the peril of all of humanity and everything that has ever been simultaneously, as you clearly do?
All that you touch and all that you see and all that you lie, beg, borrow, and steal, and everything under the sun is in tune, right? That.
But the sun is eclipsed by the moon. Yeah.
Yes. There's no dark side of the moon. Maybe it's all dark, right? So right. So I track you, right? And I think that you mentioned game theory, and certainly we have lots of friends that are deep in that world and map and model many of those permutations and outcomes. And generally, when I speak to them, I end up soul crushed and in the fetal position for several days afterwards. Like literally, like very rarely do I have a actual visceral reaction to conversations. And there's times where I feel queasy, I feel like puking, I feel like literally running away. And it occurred to me, this is a helpful fiction I'm willing to sign on for myself. I'm not asserting it, but in the same way that like the whole field of behavioral economics that Kahneman, Thaler, Dubner, Levitt, the Freakonomics guys like popularized, which was, hey, Homo economicus, the idea of a rational individual making trade-offs and always making the best self-interested decision, that's a total fiction. That's bullshit. We are freaky, contradictory, moody. We're just fickle people. And isn't that more interesting? And in the realm of game theoretics, it feels like we've almost got Homo Machiavellius. What is the self-interested, cynical son of a bitch who's always going to do the shitty thing, multipolar traps, you name it, right? And to me, there is something I do, to your point about how many near misses have we had and all that kind of stuff. And you could look at the Cold War, like we should have blown each other up 1,000 times. And there's that Russian dude in the sub who just didn't push the button. There were so many near misses. There were computer glitches. Somehow we didn't. And I feel like even if it's just an article of faith, we don't hold it up as a law of nature or physics, right? We just say, hey, leave space for grace. Leave space for grace. Like, does any of this stuff pencil out actuarially? Nope. But shy of just slitting our wrists now and being done with it, can we leave space for grace? And to me, like, yes, it rhymes and it's kind of a neat concept, but like if you look at history, that's what has always happened. Like the moments that history has turned, right? Those cusps have been when someone unleashes this asymmetric force multiplier of humanity. And, Gandhi called it satyagraha, he called it truth force, right? Howard Thurman, the African-American mystic, brought it back to the States, rebranded it soul force. His mentee, MLK, then socialized that in 63 in his I Have a Dream speech, where we can meet the majestic heights of physical force with soul force, right? Nancy Keene at Harvard Business School, wrote that book, Forged in Crisis. It was Dietrich von Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who tried to assassinate Hitler. It was Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, Abe Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and one other. And it was basically what I found so badass about her book was it wasn't hagiographies. It wasn't like these retrospective, like, look at these heroes that did this thing. She went into their letters and their correspondence and what was actually going through their heads at these moments, these cusps. And it was no idea what we're doing. We just have to try something. We're going to just lob a Hail Mary and fingers crossed this works out. Like the Emancipation Proclamation, like every kid gets that in grade school and high school and college ad infinitum. Lincoln was at his wit's end. He had zero, he was despondent and had no confidence. Like to your point, I wouldn't bet against us. Like he wasn't that this was going to change the Civil War or win for the Union or or create a multicultural post-racial society. Nothing. He was out of bullets. This was his last one. And so that to me is the premise of this whole book, which is not just a plea for courage and curiosity and connection, but hopefully a toolkit. Like it's absolutely inadequate to just kind of scrunch up our eyes and wish for it. Like we actually have to go do it. And if we can, then can we unlock that force multiplier? That space for grace is us. It's not UFOs. It's not baby Jesus. It's us showing up and doing the impossible, because there's no other option.
Oh boy. Well, this is great. It does effectively establish the point I was searching for here, that you are sometimes reduced to what you describe as a fetal position by discussion with others who have looked into the abyss, is effectively the thing I was wondering about.